Hello, NASCAR fans. Welcome to our on pit row NASCAR race rewind for the Quaker State 400 at Kentucky Speedway this past Saturday night. Brad Keselowski came away with the win. Dominant performance, I thought. Kyle Busch was in there with a chance for most of the race, but just couldn't hang in there with that powerful Penske Ford. I'm joined by my partner Dan Beaver. Hey Dan, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Just waiting for that race at Daytona next week, and glad that Kentucky wasn't Daytona. I has to say that.
Not a big fan of restrictor plates, even though you love the name Firecracker 400. We are resurrecting that, by the way. That's the official name of the race this weekend. The official on pit row recognized name is the Firecracker 400 for this week. I don't care what they say about Coke 400 or whatever it's supposed to be.
Coke Zero 400 powered by Coca-Cola. Do they really need the powered by Coca-Cola after Coke Zero 400?
Well, we should probably
figure that out.
we should probably feel lucky that it isn't Coke Zero 400 powered by Coca-Cola and funded by Diet Coke.
Yeah.
and presented
Yeah,
to you and presented to you by Sprite.
But we're looking ahead, I suppose. This is supposed to be a rewind, right?
And I'll tell you something. They would do that if they could get away with it, if they could get the money for it. Yeah, you're right. We're supposed to be rewinding and recapping the race at Kentucky Speedway Saturday night. What'd you think? I mean, I thought it was a pretty good race. I think you kind of called it, that you thought the Fords would be back in with a chance this week after several weeks of Hendrick Motorsport and Chevy Motor domination.
Yeah, and I got the wrong one of the two. I think I called Joey Logano to be the winner. But they were going to finish 1-2 until he dropped a cylinder or whatever happened to him. The fact that he could nurse that thing as long as he did at the end of the race, still come home with a top 10 finish, that's pretty amazing, especially since it was on my fantasy team. That means usually they're just going to blow up and there are going to be pieces flying into the stands, and
Yeah.
or they're going to crash and blow up. But I was shocked that he managed to hang on to it for that long.
It was. We talked a little bit before we started this hangout today that it was interesting how many teams were involved in the top 10 this week.
Yeah, if you think teamwork doesn't mean something, this is the race that people are going to point to show that it does. In the top 12, 11 of them were members of four teams. We had Keselowski and Logano just dominating. We had Kyle Busch and Matt Kenseth finishing in the top five, and Denny Hamlin was running third before he cut his tire and slammed at the wall, so he might have been there at the end. We had Hendrick Motorsports sweeping the top 10, and then we had Stuart Haas, who we keep waiting to implode, finishing 7th, 11th, and 12th. So the only driver who wasn't one of those teammates, one of those team members in the top 12 was Ryan Newman. That, I think, says a lot about Ryan Newman's ability, says a lot about the potential for that team. But even if you drop down a little bit beyond that, beyond the top 12, you had Ryan Newman then in third, Paul Menard was 15th, and Austin Dillon was 16th. So you still have that same teamwork theme going on at the front of the pack, if you just adjust what the front of the pack is a little bit. There really weren't that many people that had a shot at running well, and I think that's I think we're going to see more and more of that, especially on the unrestricted intermediate speedways as we go forward.
I wonder if this isn't one of the things that Keselowski was alluding to when he was asked, I think, after Michigan, whether he thought that the Penske Fords would be able to find something between now and the chase that would help them compete with the Hendrick cars. And Brad said at the time, he said, "No, we've pretty much got what we've got. We're going to have to think about strategy." I didn't see strategy in this race. I saw a car that had plenty of power on a 1.5-mile racetrack.
Yeah, Kyle Busch's third place finish wasn't exactly strategy, but a little bit of luck.
Right.
That he ended up being one of those drivers that was on pit road when the caution came out. Dale Earnhardt Jr. also probably would have gotten a top 10 finish, might not have gotten the top 5 if it hadn't been for that. So we had a couple of fortuitous things, but This was pretty much flat out sprint. 400 miles doesn't give you a lot of time to work on the car, and strategy only works if that final pit stop, that final segment, is of the right length, or the final two segments are of the right length. This time they weren't.
Yeah. Any other big stories? The one thing the comment from the drivers, or comments from the drivers before the race, I didn't hear much after the race, was the roughness of the Kentucky racetrack, and they're starting to even call for resurface already. I know you don't want to see that, but I think it's inevitable.
I don't think the drivers wanted to see it either. That's not what I got out of a lot of that. I think they might. It might be nice if they tore up the front stretch, that segment that leads on either side of the start finish line, is where they were just roller coastering through there, and bottoming out. If you just repaved that one part of the track, then you don't pick up those speeds in the corner that keep you from being able to make passes, brings back that dreaded arrow push. So that might be one thing that they could look at. I think another storyline out of last week's race might have been Michael Lynette finishing as well as he did, 18th. He was the second highest rookie. Kyle Larson hitting the wall, cutting the tire, was probably the biggest disappointment of the race, being the lowest finishing rookie. And now he's got low finishes at the beginning of the season and his last one, so he's kind of bookended by his two worst finishes at Daytona and at Kentucky. So you can lose the impression of how good someone is in a very short period of time. If Larson has another bad run this next week, you're going to start thinking about Austin Dillon maybe be able to close that gap in the rookie battle, since they only take 17 races. So Dillon's still got a shot to catch up. Finishing 16th last week, good run for him.
Yeah, and Dillon's part of that RCR team that looks like they're starting to figure it out, as you said a little while ago. Newman's good finish. Menard's strung together several good finishes the last month or so. Yeah, maybe they got something figured out over there at RCR and with those Earnhardt motors.
Yeah, but there seems to be something in Paul Menard's makeup that he just can't get that third consecutive top 10. He gets close a number of times. I think I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I've looked it up in the past, and I think it's like three race streaks where he's had top 10s, and he can back them up. He can get two top 10s in a row, two top 5s in a row now, but he just can't get that third one. So he's going to need to do that before we really start thinking about RCR as being a powerhouse. He's got to string together 3 or 4 top 10s. Austin Dillon's got to put together 2 top 10s, or at least get another top 10. But for now, those top 15 finishes just outside the top 15, I think is good enough to give him some praise.
Isn't it funny? I mean, we're both really fans of just about every kind of racetrack that NASCAR runs on. I don't think it's the case with a large segment, at least of the NASCAR fandom, as that they like these mile-and-a-half so-called cookie-cutter racetracks. But after coming out of the race, as much as I enjoyed watching it, there wasn't really not much of a story there, was there?
No, there wasn't, and it wasn't the most exciting race in the books. There were long green flag segments, and with Keselowski and Logano running away from the field, there wasn't a whole lot to pay attention to. I think that's part of the problem with what can happen on a cookie cutter track, but it doesn't always, and they are all different. Kentucky certainly was challenging from the driver's standpoint. It's always a little frustrating to me when people say you can't call them cookie cutter tracks. You can't say they're similar because the drivers say they're different. The drivers say all sorts of things. The drivers are sitting in the cockpit of the car. They know every little minute difference from track to track. They know what the difference in banking feels like. They know what the bumps feel like. But if that doesn't translate into results, or if it doesn't translate into a different storyline or a different feeling to these mile-and-a-half tracks, then I think it is perfectly legitimate to call them cookie-cutter tracks. It doesn't have to be derisive, but it's descriptive. And if you don't want to be lumped into that description, you're going to have to come up with a different style track. You're going to have to start building some short tracks or building some intermediates that have their own character, like Homestead and Darlington and Rockingham. But until then, you're just going to have to cry all the way to the bank when people describe your track some way that you don't want it.
Well, and really part of NASCAR's history is races like this where a driver would dominate, and it really wasn't, the thing Steve always talks about, our partner Steve Ronkowitz always talks about, is the fact that what's really different today about running on these tracks, these mile-and-a-half tracks like Atlanta, like Charlotte, like places that they ran 30 years ago, is the cars are so much more reliable. You used to have cars break down. You might get a driver that would be 6 laps ahead at a place like Atlanta or Darlington, and you talk about exciting. Boy, that's really exciting, but you didn't know if he was going to last.
Yeah, so you did kind of say, you sat on the edge of your seat. Was it one of the races, Dave Marcus won. I think at one point he was down 4 or 5 laps, and the leader went out, and they just had to run it out in order to let him catch up and win the race.
Right.
Might not have been Marcus, but it was one of those old-time drivers. So those things happen. It's not going to happen today, and with NASCAR's no driver left behind policies, the free passes and the waiver rounds, it's going to everybody's in it until the end because everybody can make up a lap except for the back markers.
I think maybe the other big story that did come out of this race is we didn't have a full field for a Sprint Cup race for the first time in I don't know how long time. There were some articles out there that, is this showing, that NASCAR has a weakness? What do you think?
I'm surprised that someone didn't bring out a post-entry car, another post-entry car. Mike Bliss and a third or fourth BK Racing car. They did their best to fill the field, but no one else came up with one. I think Kentucky is not the most lucrative race on the track, on the circuit. Normally, you've got drivers earning greater than $100,000 all the way down into the 30s, and you had drivers who were finishing the top 15. Kurt Busch, I think, earned only $87,000. Kurt Busch has previous wins. He's got a championship. He's got to be getting some contingency money, and in order for him to bank that little, I think that says something as to why the teams didn't show up.
But again, I mean, is that part of that? Is that signaling that we have an issue here in NASCAR that they can't provide the prize money to draw people to this race?
I suspect it's more of a problem at Kentucky than it is here. They've had 3 really tough races leading up to this, and this isn't going to help them any. They had the traffic in the first race. They had the rain last year. I don't remember what it was the year before, but they had some other issues where the fans just really were not terribly happy. So the fans aren't showing up, and if they're not buying tickets, then the prize money's not there. Some of that.
I think the second year was still a traffic issue. It wasn't as bad as year 1, but it was still an issue. So. And
now with this less than exciting race, it's going to be difficult next year to fill the stands again unless they do something amazing. Most of what they put into the prize fund, I suspect, probably was from the TV revenue. And as few people as were sitting in the stands, you got to imagine that the ticket revenue went to keep the lights on, to operate the track. So I think it's more of a Kentucky issue than it is a NASCAR issue. Although we've been seeing the fans' disillusionment shows up some. They're not willing to spend $400, $500 on a weekend for the family, more than maybe once a year. So instead of doing 2 races, they're doing 1. Instead of doing 1 races, sometimes they're sitting at home watching on TV. So it's been a downward decline for a couple of years now, and that speaks to NASCAR's product. I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen the attendance go up this year, because up until now, the first 10 races or so, 12 races, 15 races, we had really good racing. and you would have thought that would have driven some people out and into the stands, and maybe it won the second half for the second races on some of these tracks. But I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen a resurgence of some sort so far this year.
Well, that's it for our race rewind for the Quaker State 400 at Kentucky Speedway. Next week we go to Daytona International Speedway for a 400 miler on Independence Day weekend. That one will be close. Whether it'll be exciting, I don't know. We'll see. We'll talk about it next Tuesday right here on Google Plus and on the On Pit Road Facebook page. I'm Charlie Turner. He's Dan Beaver. Dan, we'll talk again next week about Daytona.
Sounds good. I'll be here.
All right.